As the Economist authors write in their book God is Back, religion's actually on the rise, not on the decline across the world, even in parts of the Western world. So, there is an argument saying wherever you feel like you're in a minority, that's not necessarily the case on a global scale. And you have to keep reminding yourself that really, really nutcase anti-religious people are not representative of British society at large, not at all. Otherwise we wouldn't have actually, the people we do in public life, and we are, compared to other countries, British Muslims are doing very well in public life comparatively with other countries.
Do you generally find it hard to reconcile your faith with your job then? Because the media is often deemed very Islamophobic, so...
Even by me.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Professional people work. Obviously, I find that I'm in a working environment. You have to be professional, but you have to be true to your faith as well. But it just gets...
Yeah, it's not easy. Let's be very clear. It is not easy being a practicing religious, believing Muslim and working at the media right now. It's not easy on a political level, where you find yourselves in all sorts of political discussions, especially vis-a-vis foreign affairs and things to do with wars and Muslim majority countries. Certainly not. Both in terms of your own contributions and what you want to say, but also in the way that people perceive you and assume beliefs on your part. That's one point on the political level, and then obviously on a theological level, on a religious level, yes, there's all sorts of moral discussions. There have been lots of debates about, for example, industries like the media, but not just the media, law, to a lesser extent medicine, but others, where there's a heavy drinking culture. There's a big debate about how much, for example, where jobs and decisions and connections and social networks are made in pubs. Where does that leave Muslims? There is a big discussion about that, and minorities in general. There is issues at but then, let me be balanced. At a time like now, in the middle of the month of Ramadan, I have huge support from my colleagues. There are lots of colleagues who are always asking me how you're doing, trying to find out more about it, who will eat next to me at the table, oh, I'm sorry, that's fine. Let's be very clear here. When I talk about Islamophobia in the media, I don't mean individual journalists hate Muslims, not at all. It's in the same way that you might talk about institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police Force. It's about a certain mindset, it's about certain assumptions by organisations as a whole, it's about an approach to covering stories. It's not about individual people being bad, nasty people, no, not at all, in fact the opposite. But it's definitely not easy. And I've said this before, I wrote this in a Guardian article last year, that 7-8 years ago, before I was more of a public figure when I went to television, if I came into a group of students like this, I would say, we need more Muslims in the media, don't just be a doctor or a lawyer, stop all the Asian one-way direction, try being a journalist, come on, we need more people. Now I don't do that. I don't do that because I honestly don't want it on my conscience that I recommend somebody to go into journalism and they struggle with some of the stuff that I've had to struggle with, that other people I know have had to struggle with and weren't up to it. And I would now say, look, if you're going to do it with your eyes open wide, do it with the thickest of thick skins, do it knowing that there's going to be all sorts of morally grey areas along the way. Don't go in with any kind of illusions, because however bad you think it's going to be, it'll probably be worse.
Since I think we both graduated 13 years ago from university, a lot has changed in the discourse, and of course primarily concerns Muslims. But don't you think, concerning Woolwich as well, that a time has come to address, to put the onus on not only people to defend or to reject a set of things under their name, but to also put the onus on the majority, particularly in bubbles like the media and the legal profession, of a racialized discourse that's, I think, very reminiscent of the 70s. It's not different at all. And it's almost like going back 30 years, the last 10 years, of discourse, particularly in the media. And it has a physical effect on people's lives. And surely we need to address those in those bubbles with regard to how they've internalized these assumptions, and some, I think, knowingly, about foreignness and otherness, to people that are historically British for about 200 years. And I think this has a big impact on restricting opportunity and behavior to a younger generation, who may feel they have to constantly prove themselves when others will never have to do that at all. And I think the time has come to address those assumptions.
Oh, that time came long ago.
But don't you think it's possible?
I think you've put the points very, very eloquently, more eloquently than I could. Look, I mean, I tried to make the points you're making in a film for the BBC a couple of weeks ago on Sunday Morning Live. I made a short film for them about Islamophobia in the media. And, you know, there is this reluctance to acknowledge that there is a problem. Some journalists will own up to it. Many members of the public will own up to it. Weirdly, we did a poll when I was at Channel 4 years ago and found that the majority of the public think that Muslims are demonised by the media. So it's just, you know, it's journalists in a minority here. The problem is that people don't want to own up to it. It's quite a big deal to have to own up to, you know, institutional discrimination or racism or phobia of any kind. As I say, some sections will own up to it, some won't. Definitely there's a time has come. You know, we have bombs being placed in mosques, we have people being stabbed in the street, we have all sorts of online attacks and death threats, and the denialism is phenomenal. I mean, the Prime Minister has, as far as I'm aware, the Prime Minister has yet to come out and give a public statement of any shape or form condemning the mosque attacks for which a guy's been arrested. You know, no one's asking for a Cobra meeting, but we are asking, and I would say, speaking as a Muslim, I am asking for a general condemnation. The Home Secretary wrote an article condemning the attacks in a Pakistani newspaper, which seems odd, not in the Telegraph, Times, Sun, Mail. So there is a denialism on the part of the political class, there is a denialism on the part of the media class. And yes, I mean, as I say, we definitely have to tackle this. We have to tackle it in a nuanced way because there are a lot of people out there waiting to say, well, you're playing the victim card, you're playing the race card. You know, if you say, well, Muslims have been attacked since Woolwich, the response from a lot of people on the Islamophobic side is to say, oh, but you weren't butchered in broad daylight, were you? As if, you know, two wrongs make a right, or we're comparing kind of killings and attacks, which we're not. We, you know, 99.9% of Muslims in this country condemn the barbaric murder of Paul Lee Rigby. But the issue you say is right. There's two schools of thought on the Islamophobia and the kind of attitude towards Muslims. There's one school of thought which says this has happened to every minority at some stage as part of an integration process. If you go back 100 years, you look at the Daily Mail headlines about smelly Jews bringing smelly foods from foreign places. In the Daily Mail and the Evening Standard, you will see a very similar discourse prior to what we then know was an industrialised slaughter of the Jewish people in Europe. You move on, you have the Irish community in the 70s with the IRA community, you have the Blime waves of the 1980s, and you have the Muslim discourse post 9/11, but even pre 9/11, post Cold War. And the positive argument says that, hold on, this is just what every minority community goes through, and the British public are indeed genuinely a very tolerant, reasonable bunch of people, and we will get through this, and every community integrate. And you look at the positive signs of integration, you look at the fact that we had a Muslim woman in the cabinet, etc., etc. You can find the positive stories to tell comparatively. The other side of the coin, the more, you know, the glass half empty side of the argument says we need to do something now because we've crossed all sorts of thresholds. There has been too much denialism, and basically, and I had this argument with Douglas Murray on Sunday Morning Live where he said, well, you know, nobody's died, and the argument seems to be, until you've died in great numbers, then we'll take it seriously. And you may remember when Breivik carried out his killing in Norway 2 years ago, the European Justice Commissioner, Swedish woman whose name omits me, she said at the time, look, this is a product of all the discourse that we're having in this conduct. We need to wake up to this now. And I think people woke up to it for about 20 minutes and then carried on as usual. And you know, in our lifetimes, well, not in some of your lifetimes, in my lifetime in Srebrenica, you know, less than 20 years ago, 8,000 Muslim men and boys were butchered in the heart of Europe while Western nations stood and watched. So there are very real examples of what can happen. When people say never again on Holocaust Memorial Day, well, it happened. The dark side, the half-empty argument says, well, what's going to happen? What will it take to change people's minds? God forbid, will it be actually a bomb going off in a mosque, which is full of people, that finally makes people wake up to the discourse that we see on some of our tabloids and newspapers and in Parliament? And, you know, personally, I switch. Depending on what day it is and whether the sun's out, I'm positive or I'm negative. But I don't know the right answer to that question. I hope it's the positive.
Just that, because you work in the media, criticisms like Breivik was never called a terrorist except once in The Guardian and once afterwards. But throughout the whole trial, he was never called a terrorist by any Western media. And this kind of assumptive reference, on the other actually, not so much on Muslims, have to be addressed to make a comparison about guilt and, you know, liability. Because if liability is removed from the discourse of the majority of Muslims, you won't have to prove that much in the future. You can just live.
What's interesting is the Muslim community in the Midlands put a great deal of pressure on the police in regard to the Mohammed Salim killing, which took place before the Lee Rigby killing. And interestingly, that was first treated as a kind of just a random killing. Then it was treated maybe as a race crime. You'll remember the West Midlands police, some of you may know, put up a statement which didn't say anything about any kind of terrorism with regard to the mosques. They then took the statement down when they thought no one was looking. They then put it back up with a terrorist reference, and then when they made the arrests of the suspect who's been arrested, who of course is innocent until proven guilty, they then changed it to now it's being investigated as a terrorist crime, and even the Mohammed Salim murder was reclassified as a terrorist-related incident. So, you know, there are, let's not always be glass half empty. There are changes in mindsets going on. There are people out there who get it, and it does require not just British Muslims, but people from all communities and all sides, really to come together and put pressure on media organisations and political organisations and security agencies and police forces when they behave in this kind of brazenly unfair and discriminatory manner. And I've got to run away.
I just want to say, you need to be got a train to catch, so I don't want you to miss that. I miss it with the family. So thank you so much for coming out of your way and joining us. It's been
Thanks for having me.
And please guys, a huge round of applause.